Welcome to the session on social media and advocacy and communicating in this environment. So if you think you mistakenly came to this room, then you have no choice. You have to stay here. Kidding. So let me be quick. So can you see the slide I share? Yeah, okay. So please be advised keeping your Zoom screen in speaker view, and please remain in mute for the session while the speakers are presenting. And if you have any questions or comments for speakers, so you can write your questions in the chat box, or you can ask by yourself at the end of the presentation. And if you think you don't have good connection with your internet, then turning your video feed off may be helpful during the presentation. Any questions before we start? Okay, good. Then let me introduce our speakers today. And today we have the Dr. Gregory Saxton and Dr. Chao. And Dr. Gregory Saxton, can you wave your hand?
Hello.
Yeah. So Dr. Saxton is an associate professor at the School of Business, Europe University. And Dr. Chao is associate professor at the School of Social Policy and Practice at the University of Pennsylvania. And these two researchers have long worked with on the research on nonprofit advocacy and digital technology, especially social media. And they began to examine if the nonprofit organizations use social media and how they use social media. And then they moved to the very important topic, if the social media using is working. So to know if the social media using by nonprofit organization working, you need to know if people are listening what you're saying on social media, right? So they try to measure if people are paying attention to what nonprofit organizations are saying on social media. And recently they published a book titled, where is it? So the quest for attention, nonprofit advocacy in a social media age. In that book, they specifically talking about how nonprofit organizations can receive attention from the public. So they talked about lots of the strategies for nonprofits social media use, especially for advocacy purpose. So I will, so Dr. Greg and Dr. Saxton and Go, it's all yours. So do you need to share your screen?
Okay, I just need somebody to enable me as a host, or just give me the capability.
Okay, let me. So the name of the book again is The Quest for Attention. Let me share this first. So this book, The Quest for Attention.
Okay.
Advocacy in a social media age.
Okay, so, sorry. Thanks for the introduction, Sung-Ho. Can everyone see the new slides now? Are they're showing up? Okay, perfect. Okay, today Chao and I are going to split up the presentation, and I'll take the first half. Feel free to ask plenty of questions. We'll leave lots of time at the end for any questions you might have. We've focused the presentation for practitioners, so we've left out a lot of the details on our research. We really want to focus on the practical implications and some of the interesting things in this. But if you do have any research-related questions, please feel free to ask those. We're happy to answer those as well. So we put our Twitter handles up here, and at first we're going to talk about what led us to focus on attention in our social media research, and on really what this context is that influences how nonprofit and public and even private organizations are dealing with these disruptions from social media. So I like the analogy of the printing press. When this was invented in the 15th century, it was a really disruptive technology. So it caused political upheaval, social, economic upheaval. It changed how people learned. It changed how knowledge spread, and it changed how organizations were managed. And it happened over a very long period of time. I mean, you can look here, it happened over a course of centuries. The disruption in terms of how this technology diffused throughout the whole continent. And we are probably right where the circle is in terms of social media's disruption. And for us, it's happening in a much more rapid time span. We've gone from this to social media in probably 60 years. So it's a very compressed set of disruptions. We have well over 1 billion Facebook users now. 75% of Americans are on social media for more than 2 hours a day. So the stakes and the amount of time spent on this are huge, and so are the disruptions. So one of the first disruptions that we've looked at is information overload. There's just a massive amount of information. If you want to know how to find something obscure, you can do it. The problem is, if you want to cut through all of the noise, you can often come up with very important information like cat videos. And I think cat videos are cute. We could probably look at them all day. The problem is, if you're a nonprofit organization trying to spread information out there, or a government trying to reach citizens, you are having to compete against cat videos. So it makes for a very challenging context, a very cute context, but very challenging for nonprofit organizations. This disruptions of social media also leads to a lot of new phenomena. One of them is, there were always multitaskers, but now it's even easier to multitask to an extreme. The problem is that when you do multitask, the things actually take longer, you're more prone to mistakes, and it leads to stress. Some of you, if you're a professor or if you're teaching anyone at any point, you might not be surprised that there are some students who are spending more time on social media than they do studying. I don't want to be a grumpy professor, so I know most students are studying hard, but we just have to recognize that social media takes up a lot of time. Another thing is, it breaks up our concentration. If you want to pay attention to some task that requires a lot of detail, having a tweet or a ping or a notification every couple of minutes really makes working a lot more difficult. And so we have all of these, you might call them annoyances or disruptions of life, of people bringing cell phones into meetings. You've students who are looking at their cell phones during class, trying to get around it by having a fake cell phone arm. And as anybody dealing with this in the workplace, you can either be wise like Yoda, or anybody is old enough to remember Dana Carvey, his grumpy old man. It's enough to almost make you want to talk about, back in my day, we didn't need social media, or even wonder if the Amish are right. So it's a very disruptive context. But another disruption, the one that led more into our research, is about virality and memes and how ideas spread. Once again, I'll start off with some very light examples. That memes of cats again, Chuck Norris is a meme, ideas that just spread very quickly throughout society, and some of them have been persistent. Some are less persistent, like the photobombing squirrel or grumpy cat. And you may remember planking. The point about planking is that it's not just ideas that are spreading through social media, it's also actions. The action in planking, one thing that is interesting about it is that the focus is on the person who's sharing this meme. So they are at the center of attention. And we see in nonprofit organizations, and social media, that there are a lot of these mini celebrity type actions that spread as well. For example, bring back our girls. You could think of this as planking for politics. You could think of Like a Girl and these types of viral marketing actions as planking for progress. You could think of the Ice Bucket Challenge as planking for donations. So again, the individual is here, but it's what is spreading throughout society is some action. And this one can actually be for good. And occasionally this can lead to not just the individual, but really group movements. And so with social media and other technologies, when you do have these viral ideas spreading along with actions and groups, occasionally you can have things like Tahrir Square in 2011. So we can have very impactful things. So these types of phenomena are what led us to look at attention in nonprofit organizations. And it's a really peculiar context. I want to share something, an interesting point. Chao and I, we tapped into a lot of big data, especially using the Python programming language to tap into data available for social media and for crowdfunding projects and fundraising projects. And from that, I want to share one of the most interesting features of attention and social media, and that is the power law. A lot of you are probably familiar with what the Pareto distribution or the power law is, but the distinction is to the normal distribution. You've all seen the bell curve and this normal distribution where there's an average here in the middle that is quite meaningful. So if you're an average student, it makes sense. You're right in the mean, and if somebody's a little bit above it, a little bit below, it makes sense to us. We all have, in other words, an intuitive understanding of what the normal distribution is. And when we are thinking of how anything is distributed that's new, that is our baseline assumption. The problem is that assumption is not typically valid on a lot of social media and attention-related issues. So this is what the power law distribution looks like. It is a non-normal distribution. Most of the people are on one side, and there's very few people who are at the extreme here in terms of, you could think of this as being if somebody was way off in the extreme in terms of a class getting not an A+, but an A to the 100th power grade, which is not really possible. So I have a little quiz for you. You can type in comments or just play along at home, but I have a little quiz for you of whether these phenomena or these issues, whether the distribution is a power law or whether it's a normal distribution. So height, what do you think? It's normally distributed or a power law? You probably guessed that you're right. It's a normal distribution. Most people are average, and the great bulk of people are all in the center. So that mean, that average value, it makes sense. It conveys meaningful information. What about commute times? You take 1,000 people and distribute how long it takes to commute to work. Once again, yes, it's a normal distribution. There is that standard bell curve. What about number of years worked in a company? Again, yes, that is a normal distribution, some sample data from a cereal factory, that most people are in the middle and very few people worked at either extreme. IQ, again, it's a normal distribution. People theoretically are supposed to be around 100, the average person, and a very few people, Einstein over here or Forrest Gump down here. Okay, what about grades? Again, yes, you guessed it. GRE scores are a normal distribution. Some sample data from a physics class, again, relatively normally distributed. Down here, D+ is still a pass. So here is a gratuitous plug for the movie Tommy Boy. Again, yes, normally distributed. Number of pages in a book, you're right, normally distributed. What about number of books sold? Okay, here's where things turn into power laws. That here you may have heard of the long tail, that book sales per book are not normally distributed. Most books are over here. They don't sell very much, and very few are the real winners. Blog popularity, how popular different blogs are. I've read before that the average viewing audience of a blog is one, the person who wrote it. So we have most blogs are losers and very few are winners. So in other words, here's another example of a power law. Interesting thing is we see this pattern, and Chao and I did in our data again and again with social media data, that this seems almost to be not like the normal distribution. The power law distribution is the new default in terms of attention-related and social media-related phenomena. So I'm going to, before I pass it over to Chao, give you just a couple of nonprofit examples to highlight this. One of them is Chao and I downloaded data from Twitter of the nonprofit times 100 organizations. So we have arrayed the number of followers of each of these 100 organizations. You can see on the far right-hand side, there's a few that have at that point had over 150,000 followers. Then you have to go way down to 50,000 to find the next organization. And by far, most organizations are on the left-hand side. This is a histogram, which shows that on the left-hand side, roughly a bit under 60 of the 100 organizations had very few followers. And by far, the majority of organizations are below this dotted red line, which is the mean. So that here is a classical power law. We have very few winners in terms of getting a lot of followers, gaining a lot of attention, and most are not winners. Most of them have very little attention. And so this power law distribution, if this was a normal distribution, the mean would make sense, the average value would make sense, and we'd expect to see most organizations clustered in the middle. We don't see that. Here's another example, looking at Indiegogo's. You may be familiar with that crowdfunding site like Kickstarter. Here, looking at just under 3,000 crowdfunding campaigns from nonprofit organizations. These were all 501c3s. And this histogram does not make sense. The reason is that way over here on the far right-hand side, the maximum that a campaign that an organization got was $1 million. So I'm going to zoom in on just dropping the 24 largest and only looking at the campaigns that earned less than $50,000. So this is all of them except for the 24 really huge lottery winners. And here again, we see a classic power law where very few organizations are even getting close to $50,000. The mean value is under $5,000. And most organizations on the left-hand side are gaining $0 or very close to it. So here's one example of how somebody got $62,000. They brought in a celebrity. They brought in Rahm Emanuel to help spread the word, to try to gain information, to gain viewers and gain donors for Windy City Hoops. In Chicago, trying to gain money for a local grassroots organization. On the other hand, there was also from Kickstarter this famous potato salad. So again, it gained $61,000 just for basically a joke. This is the equivalent of the cat videos of the crowdfunding world. The reason I point this out is that, where have we come so far? Is that we've talked a lot about virality and how attention spreads, and how that attention and virality can spread to things that are really concrete or tangible benefits for nonprofit organizations and for society. But that the context is different. You are competing against potato salad and cat videos and celebrities and power laws, where with power laws, it's very difficult to predict what the performance will be. And so it's difficult to know what an average means. The Ice Bucket Challenge, for example, was the equivalent of winning the network lottery. So it is these puzzles that led Chao and I to delve into, to really dive into the research of what leads to attention for nonprofit organizations. So with that, I'll pass it over to Chao, and take it away, Chao.
Thank you, Greg. Good morning, everybody. It's good to see some old friends like Yangju and Sung Ho, and it's also good to meet some new friends here. I saw one participant named Girl Scouts of, I can only see part of the title. So welcome you all to the session. Before we started, Greg and I made an agreement. We decided that Greg will be in charge of all the fun stuff, and I will talk about some of the more serious or boring stuff. So bear with me for the next 10 minutes, and then we'll go back to the fun stuff if we have time. So, you know, Greg has shared much of the background information about the technology as a disruptive force and some of the very intriguing features of social media, attention, power law, and whatnot. And I think that offers a very good background information for our own research. In our study, as you can see from the title, what we're trying to do, what we have been trying to do in the past few years is to try to develop what we would call the attention-based theory of nonprofit management. And by the way, this is some sort of a exaggeration to get your attention. There's no such thing as attention-based theory of nonprofit management. Not yet. We're working on it. Maybe in a few years we'll write a book on that. But that's just the beginning of a journey. But what we're really trying to study is this phenomenon of attention, and what implications it has for nonprofit management. So, Greg, can I turn to the next page, please? So when we started this study, we benefited tremendously from the wisdoms and the interactions with our practitioner colleagues in the nonprofit sector. And in fact, our very first writing on the subject was not published in a academic journal. It was actually published in a practitioner journal magazine called The Nonprofit Quarterly. I'm sure many of you have already have read articles from that magazine. It's considered the leading trade magazine of the nonprofit sector. So we published an article called Attention Philanthropy, the Good, the Bad, and the Strategy. And it's a short article, but that presented some of the initial thoughts that we have regarding this puzzle that we had, the puzzle that Greg mentioned earlier. That is, we're trying to predict the emergence of a new paradigm for nonprofit work. And we label the new paradigm attention philanthropy. The keyword of attention, there are the two keywords for the paradigm of attention philanthropy. One is information overload. I think you have already seen all the examples of information overload from Greg's presentation. So in today's world, we are buried in this pile of information. We're drowning in this sea of information coming from all different directions, and we are trying to make sense of it. That's essentially where we as nonprofit leaders find ourselves in on a daily basis. So in the past, like 20, 30 years ago, when there was no internet or especially no social media, the world seems to be much quieter. For the nonprofit leaders, you seem to have a clear mission, you have a clearly identified group of constituents, you got supporters and stakeholders, but in today's world, it's becoming so crowded. The space is becoming so crowded. The donors and supporters are considering way more candidates of nonprofit organizations than it used to be. So that is a challenge we're trying to manage. So our question is, how do nonprofit organizations manage to grab the attention from your potential supporters and donors and volunteers? And how do you manage to maintain that attention? And more importantly, how do you benefit from this attention? And this by benefiting from the attention, I'm not saying that just for your organization to benefit financially from the attention, but more broadly, how does this competing for attention process allows you to achieve your mission in a more effective way? I think that is the challenge that we find ourselves in, and that is really that's the key question we're trying to explore. That Greg and I have been doing in the past few years. So Greg, next please. And that led to, we have done a number of studies and published a number of things along this line, and that eventually came to this new book that was published by Stanford University Press earlier this year. And this book represents a systematic attempt to develop an attention-based theory of nonprofit advocacy. It's a more focused topic on nonprofit advocacy, but where we develop a conceptual framework, and we examined our framework with tremendous data. So we say with more confidence that this is a theory that we are presenting to our readers, and you're welcome to check out the book and take a look at it. And I guarantee you, it's an interesting book. With this commercial, I want to now talk about what's in the book. As you can readily guess, the key takeaway of this book, if we have to use one sentence to summarize what we're trying to deliver, the message we're trying to deliver with this book, that is, we are trying to propose attention as a key intermediate goal and important resource for nonprofit organizations and advocacy organizations in particular. That is, in the social media context in particular, attention is a necessary immediate step. Before you can achieve any important organizational goals, you must be able to get attention from your donors, volunteers, supporters, and the broader public. So that is the key takeaway from this organization. But it's also important to emphasize that attention is just the means to the end. It's not the end itself. The end is to achieve the mission of your organization, not to just get attention, but it's just a necessary step before you can achieve that mission. And eventually, in a few minutes, I'm going to go back to the topic and ask question, how do you do that, right? Assuming that you do have the attention from the public, what do you do with that attention? How do you turn that attention into action? But that's something we're going to revisit in just a few minutes. This logic model presents essentially a sketch of all the main conceptual elements of this book. And on the left end of the logic model is the antecedent conditions. Before any organization starts the social media work, there are some organizational and contextual factors that need to be in place before you can do any social media work. That includes the initial resource endowments of your organization, your partners, your stakeholders, and the whole 9 yards. And they are not directly related to the social media work of your organization, but these are the antecedents. These are the conditions that you need to have in place before you engage in the social media work. And then the next is the input section, which we didn't really quite discuss in the book, but we briefly mentioned it in the book. That is, although social media platforms are free for organizations to use, as long as these are basic services, and you can use them for free, you still need to have input into these activities. You need to have some resources, you need to devote your staff time and some financial resources to set things up. And you need to have a strategy on how to use the social media, how to engage with your stakeholders on social media. So there still needs to be some sort of input before you start your social media work. But the focus of the book is on the last 4 sections of of the model, of the logic model. So that is essentially what our book has focused on. We talk about the social media messages, how that lead to attention, how attention and how, and also the different pathways or mechanisms by which the attention can be turned into organization and advocacy and outcomes. But let's first talk about the next section, which is the social media activities. I want to emphasize this because there's something quite unique about our work on social media. I know many of you in this room, your organization is probably on social media, on Twitter, on Facebook, and on LinkedIn. What's unique about our activities on social media is that you are essentially doing two things. You're essentially you're sending messages, and you're making connections. That's what essentially a social media platform offers. It offers an infrastructure where you can make connections and architecture, right? And you on a daily basis you're taking those two dynamic types of actions. You're sending messages, you're sending original messages, you're forwarding other people's messages, and you're making connections in different ways. So that's essentially what we do on social media. And I want to give you some examples of what messages look like on social media. I'm sure you're familiar with it, but here's just a couple of quick examples of messages sent by ACLU in the past couple of years. So you see clearly how sometimes they send original messages, sometimes they retweet other organizations' messages. And what's interesting about this, as you can see, is that you can choose to follow and be followed. Or you can follow others and you can be followed, and that's a way of making connective actions. And in terms of messages, you are sending messages, and your message can be liked and it can be retweeted, and that's our way of measuring the attention you get. If your message receives a lot of attention, a lot of retweets or favorites or likes, then we consider that you have received a lot of attention. So it's a very intuitive measure for attention on social media. And then we turn to the, by the way, I skipped a slide because I think Greg's being impatient. He doesn't like my slow pace, and he's trying to hurry me up. The idea is that the second type of action is connecting actions. So in order to sending messages, you're making friends, you're expanding your network. And that's the second type of actions. And then let me offer you some examples of what we do. But more specifically, for an organization, there are different ways of making connections. At the account level, as I mentioned briefly earlier, you can make friends. You can follow people, you can be friends with people. That's how you expand your network. That's how you make connections. But connections can occur at a message level as well. You can make connections with people or organizations by replying to their messages, by liking their messages, by sharing their messages, or you can even do so by using hashtags where you can share your messages with a lot of other people that who do not necessarily know that you exist. That's a tremendous way of getting the word out and making connections. And we have hyperlinks and user mentions as well. Here is an example of the Community Foundation for Greater Buffalo, where, as you can see, there are account level connections that you can make. You can follow people, you can follow others, and you can have a lot of followers, and you can like other people's messages, and you can also, of course, send messages out as well. And of course, not everybody is very successful or effective in getting people's attention on social media. As we have this PKD Foundation, that is a polycystic kidney foundation. It's a very specialized foundation for with focus on the particular disease. So as you can see, it's not particularly active on social media, and when they do send out a message, they don't quite get much attention. There's only 11 retweets and five likes. So overall, back to Greg's point, many activities on social media follows the power law. It is very few messages that you send out receive tons of attention, but most of the messages you don't. They disappear in cyberspace. People don't pay attention to them at all. In this book, we have made an effort to help understand the important question, or the million-dollar question, of how to turn attention into action. Because in the first half of the book, we talk about how different factors could influence your ability to get attention. We identified a variety of network characteristics, communication strategy factors, and how those affect your ability to get attention. But a more important question to us that we don't really have a firm answer is, how do you turn that attention into meaningful, tangible impact? I think that's something that every nonprofit leader would like to know, because everybody is essentially on social media today, because you have to. As everybody else is on social media, I'm also on social media, but what do I do with it? What I can get from my work on social media? And here we offer some ideas. We have identified 3 pathways by which you turn attention into action and impact. The first pathway is what we would call boundary spanning and coalition building. Because we know that social media platform essentially is a social networking mechanism. You use the platform to develop your social networks online. So boundary spanning is part of the nature of the platform, and so naturally, if you want to turn all the attention that you have into some sort of tangible outcomes, then boundary spanning is one way to do it. That is, you use social media to use the attention that you are getting to more effectively span the boundaries of your organization to build coalitions with other organizations and stakeholders. So we have provided some detailed discussion on how that particular mechanism or pathway works out. And but in the interest of time, we'll just stop here and turn to the second pathway. The second pathway is also very intuitive. That is, many nonprofit leaders have this doubt about the work on social media. That is the social media making any difference? I know I have to have it because everybody has it, but what difference does it make? And because much of my work is still offline, I'm still meeting with clients, I do training sessions, I engage with stakeholders, through town hall meetings and whatnot. But so how is this online stuff related to my offline work? And here we offer the second pathway as to create online-offline synergy. And we have done a number of case studies of nonprofit advocacy organizations to look into how they effectively combine their offline work with their online presence. And we find that for these successful organizations, they have experimented with different ways of combining their online work with their offline activities. So in other words, if you want to make a tangible impact with the work that you do, remember now you have 2 battlefields, or you have 2 sets of resources at your disposal. You have your online resources, you have offline resources. You need to be able to find a way to combine them effectively. And again, it's easier said than done, because from our case studies and interviews, we found that many organizations, although they like the idea of combining both type of work, in practice it's much more difficult because these kinds of work are handled in different departments, and those departments don't necessarily talk to each other. And so when you try to work toward the same mission, the same cause, sometimes the lack of effective communication or interaction or coordination between those two sets of work could actually jeopardize your function. And now let's turn to the next, the last mechanism or pathway, that is to generate social media capital. So how do you turn, so our argument that if you have attention, you want to turn that attention into a special type of resource that we call social media capital. This is the concept that we developed over the past couple of years. And the idea is that social media capital is a special type of a social capital. And what's amazing about social capital, I'm sure many of you have read about social capital, but social capital essentially is a network-based resource. It's not a typical traditional financial resource or human resource that you have, but it's embedded in the kind of networks that you have within your organization or with other organizations. Here is an interesting example to illustrate how the traditional hierarchical organizational chart can be misleading when it comes to the kind of social resources that you have. Look at this employee named Cole on the left side of the organizational chart. This is an oil company. It has different divisions: exploration, drilling, and production. But what's interesting, if you look at Cole is very low in the organizational hierarchy, right? He or she is in, within the division exploration, and he's, the person is real down below in the hierarchy. But if you look at the outside, on the right side, Cole actually has the most extensive network within the organization. The person knows pretty much everybody. And that indicates the kind of influence or impact that the person could potentially have in the organization. So that's the key point that is delivered through the concept of social capital. That is, with the social capital, you can really provide resources and influences that otherwise you would not be able to provide. And our argument for social media capital is that on the social media context, it is even more so. It's even more important to generate the social media capital. The argument we're trying to make here is a very strong one. We argue that in the social media context, social media capital is something that you must have before you can make any meaningful, tangible outcomes or impact. There's no other way around it. When you go online, offline you have many ways of getting your work done. You don't necessarily have to have a social capital. Well, it's better that you have some, but even if you don't have, you can use your financial resources. You can have other ways to get work done. But on social media, if you want to get any work done within the online, then social media capital is something that you must have. You must have a network of audience. You must be able to have someone you can talk to before you can really share your message. So that is a key argument we are trying to present with the concept of social media capital. I know we're running out of time, so I don't think that we can go into the specifics of social media capital. But there's one short essay I wanted to bring your attention to. That is, it's a short essay that we wrote for the Nonprofit Quarterly. Again, that practitioner magazine. We call it Social Media Capital for Nonprofits: How to Accumulate It, Convert It, and Spend It. Our idea is that the network embedded resources on social media that you generate, it can actually be converted and spent to achieve your organizational goals. You want to find out why, how to make that happen, and an article would be a good way to start the process. And with that, I think we should stop, and we'll look for questions and comments from you. And Greg, you have anything you want to add here?
No, that's great, Chao. I think let's open it up for questions. Sung-ho, do you have to do anything on your end?
No, thank you for your presentation. And I just shared the link for the article the Chao just presented, the last. So, well, thank you for the presentation. And now we have about 7 minutes for questions and answers. So if you have any questions, please feel free to ask. You can unmute yourself, or you can just chat in the chat room.
Hi, I have a question. Well, Youngju Lee, the director of Nonprofit Management Program at UCF. It's really nice to see you virtually. I have to confess, I'm a big fan of your research on social media, so I really follow you.
Thank you.
So you talked about the importance of accumulating social capital and social media capital through social media. And I believe that most nonprofit organizations use multiple platforms. So while working on your book, I mean, have you looked at the differences across different platforms, like social media capital on Twitter, social media capital on Facebook or Instagram? I mean, did you see any differences?
Oh, that's a great question. I don't know. Do you want to take this one, Chao?
I think you should take this one.
Okay.
And I'll chime in.
Okay.
By the way, Youngju is a good friend. This is not a setup. This is not a question that we knew beforehand.
No, I think your intuition is right, that I think what you're implying is that there should be differences, right? And
I believe so.
And so, yeah, I think there are, and that the Facebook and from Twitter, from what's going on in Snapchat or Instagram and LinkedIn will just be fundamentally different networks. And that what really complicates it is that you need to decide what your strategy is first. In other words, are you going to be, you need to, in order to build that audience and get the attention and the social media capital, you have to first decide what your strategy is going to be. Are we going to be somebody who's, for the nonprofit sector in Orlando, going to be a curator and try to curate all the information related to topic X? And if you're doing that, Instagram won't be as helpful for you. Are you going to be somebody who is just coming up with original knowledge and spreading that? Is that your strategic role? And so I guess your strategic role should help determine which networks you are on and then what type of information you're communicating to which networks. And so if you're, so it partly depends on who you're trying to target. If you're targeting younger people who are in one geographical location, that would be different than somebody trying to target people internationally. And so I don't know if I'm dancing around the question, but what I'm trying to say is, yes, I think you're right. We would expect to see differences, and we do, looking at the sample of organizations in Philadelphia, and that we get back to that far left-hand side of our figure 1.1, which is, before you decide which ones to get on and what content you're going to spread, is really, you have to decide that big strategic question. And something Chao was getting at is, there often the trouble with the online-offline synergy is that a lot of organizations just aren't having that big strategic conversation before they jump onto social media.
Mm-hmm.
So I don't know if you have anything to add.
Can I chime in here? Yes, and this, again, I agree with Greg that this is a great question, Youngju, and we actually had the same question in our book. And when we finished our chapter 5, the qualitative case studies with 3 advocacy organizations, our focus was on Twitter, throughout the book, for an important practical reason. That is, we had access to the Twitter data, but we are aware of the fact that Facebook is the #1 most popular social media site, and there are many other options for nonprofit organizations to choose from. It's just that as a researcher, we don't have easy access to Facebook data. And that makes it difficult for us to compare across the board, to see the differences when it comes to social media capital and social media work in general. So Andrew asked a great question. That essentially is challenging our view that social media capital is one uniformed resource that can be applied to many different settings. So maybe there are different kinds of social media capital. What you can generate from Facebook might not be the same as what you can generate from Twitter or LinkedIn. We don't know that. But further research will be able to explore that. And I believe Andrew is doing some of that in her own work. And in my project with Sang Ho, we actually found something quite interesting. We studied the Los Angeles neighborhood councils. There are 96, 97 neighborhood councils in Los Angeles City. And we studied their social media use. And we found that many of those neighborhood councils started with using Twitter as their main social media platform. But at one point, as if they agreed, they decided to drop Twitter and turn to Facebook. Because as you can imagine, for neighborhood associations, Facebook would provide a more viable platform for neighborhood residents to share their picture, their videos, their experiences, their stories than Twitter, because Twitter is too limiting in terms of the word choices. So there are variations. We are aware of the differences, and that's really a fascinating topic for future research.
Thank you, and congratulations on your book.
Thank you so much.
Looking forward to reading it.
Thank you.
Okay, so I think we can take one or two more questions. Anyone? Okay, so I have a question for you. So it sounds like there is some secrets for nonprofit organizations that can get attention successfully based on your theories and research. So can you tell us one example that nonprofit organizations use social media successfully and how they succeeded, and based on your interview or your research?
I'm not sure we can do it in 1 minute somehow. That's a tough question. In our book, we actually shared the experiences of three nonprofit advocacy organizations. For confidentiality reasons, we cannot reveal their name, but they are prominent nonprofit advocacy groups at national or regional levels. And it's difficult to provide a quick summary of how the organization use social media to get attention effectively. But I think I'm going to tweak the question a little bit. Is that how an established organization? Because many of us in this room, you are leaders of an established nonprofit organization. You are used to doing nonprofit work in the traditional way, in the offline way. But now with social media, how can you confront the challenge? How can you do the work online more effectively? I think that is the challenge that the three organizations that we studied all share, in over the years. And one organization in particular was a consumer right advocacy organization. They have been quite highly influential in the offline world, but the online social media world has been a tremendous challenge to them. And their traditional model of subscription and using subscription to keep membership and using professional experts' advice to providing professional expert advice to their members doesn't seem to be working anymore. They have to explore new ways of doing things on social media. So I think that's probably a topic for another day. But I don't think we can easily find a quick example to share. But I think it's the same challenge that we all face when we're trying to do social media work. But Greg might have something else to add here.
No, I just checking I'm not muted. No, I think you're right. I like what you said, and the difference is it almost is helpful to think of the difference between those brand new organizations that just aren't bound by the normal ways of doing things, and these organizations, and even informal and so non-501c3s are doing a lot of the really good work, and so those are a challenge to the traditional organizations. But I think we're running over now, so I don't want to hopefully stop people from going to the next thing.
And there is a cautionary tale note as well. That is, what do we mean by effective? What do we mean by successful on social media? Because different organizations have different missions. Not everyone wants to get attention, or not everyone wants to get the same level of attention that other organizations want to receive. So if you're an advocacy organization at the national level, you do want to get attention. You want to spread the word out. You want to promote your cause with a broader audience. But if you are a neighborhood association, you're really deeply embedded in a small neighborhood in the part of the city of Los Angeles, then is that really necessary for you to get all the attention on social media? Maybe not. But that doesn't necessarily mean that you don't need to be active on social media, because no matter what, it's a new platform that allows you to interact with your stakeholders. So it's a very good question. It's just we don't have a very good answer to that question.
Thank you. So thank you, Dr. Saxton and Go, for your presentation, and thanks everyone for participating in this session.